Melania Trump caught off guard on live TV as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly exposes a criminal past no one saw coming. Hidden charities, offshore accounts, and a secret plan to protect the Trump dynasty. This one has it all. Stay to the end to find out the shocking twist that left the entire courtroom speechless. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment to tell us what you think about this jaw-dropping revelation. It started with a glance. Not a glare. Not even a look of contempt. Just a glance from Representative Jasmine Crockett. Sharp, silent, perfectly timed. Cutting through the glare of studio lights and into the well-composed veneer of Melania Trump, seated 2 chairs to her right on the panel. The show was billed as a conversation about women and power in American politics. A strange enough setting given Melania's public silence on most political matters. But CNN had hyped the episode for weeks, teasing the surprise guest and the candid truths that would change the way Americans think about legacy and accountability. No one expected fireworks, certainly not the kind that would erupt before the commercial break. Yet by the 12-minute mark, the energy in the studio had shifted from tense curiosity to something electric, dangerous even. Jasmine Crockett, the rising congresswoman from Texas, known for her surgical dismantling of half-truths and double standards, had barely spoken during the opening round of soft questions. But when moderator Dana Bash lobbed a question at Melania Trump about her time as First Lady, specifically about her best campaign and her views on women's empowerment in politics, it wasn't Melania's answer that stunned the room. It was what Crockett did next. She didn't interrupt. She didn't grandstand. She waited until Melania finished her carefully sculpted, accented remarks about dignity and privacy and supporting women without judgment. And then, with her mic still off, Jasmine leaned forward slightly, lifted her hand, and requested to speak. Dana gave a quick nod, maybe hoping for a soundbite, maybe dreading one. What followed would ripple across cable news cycles, congressional briefings, group chats, legal blogs, and op-eds for weeks. Melania, Jasmine began, not as a peer or as a political rival, but as a prosecutor might address a reluctant witness. Do you believe that silence in the face of exploitation is a form of complicity? There was no anger in her voice, no raised tone, just an unwavering calm, the kind that comes from a woman who knows her facts and has chosen this exact moment, with cameras rolling and the world watching, to reveal something far bigger than personal tension. Melania blinked, shifted slightly in her seat. She glanced toward the producers behind the glass wall, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her otherwise stoic expression. "I don't understand what you mean," she replied coolly, but something in her eyes betrayed her. Jasmine smiled, just barely, like a chess player who had lured her opponent into a trap 3 moves ago. "I think you do," Crockett said. "But let me clarify for the audience." The silence was heavy now. Dana Bash leaned back. The studio was frozen. "Let's talk about the little-known property acquisition in Slovenia in 2002, Jasmine continued. "A shell company named Vistal Ventures, registered under the name of an attorney with long-standing ties to money laundering operations stretching from Moscow to Miami. Documents that, until recently, were buried in an investigation the Trump organization attempted to quash in 2017. Melania's face was suddenly unreadable. Not stoic, not shocked, just blank, as if every part of her had gone still, calculating the implications faster than her PR team could spin them. Crockett kept going. "This isn't a conspiracy theory," she said. "This is public record now, thanks to a whistleblower who came forward 2 weeks ago after hearing your recent interviews about morality and decency in public life. According to those documents, and corroborating bank statements obtained by a joint committee I serve on, you were listed as a passive beneficiary of Vistal Ventures from 2003 through at least 2010, during which time the company moved nearly $14 million through offshore accounts, funds that, according to multiple audits, were never taxed or disclosed. Dana's mouth opened slightly. A producer's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Should we cut?" But the panel was live. Fully live. No delay. Jasmine turned now slowly to face Melania directly. "So when you sit here and talk about supporting women and being best, I think the American public deserves to know whether you've also been complicit in a decade-long international financial crime that, if proven, impacted countless working families, laundered funds for oligarchs, and helped finance some of the very disinformation campaigns that hurt women around the world." It was the kind of moment that journalists dream of but rarely see in real time. The dam didn't just crack. It ruptured. The flood came instantly. Social media eruptions, congressional staffers racing to draft statements, legal teams scrambling to assess exposure, and a former First Lady, sitting in total silence, blinking hard, suddenly at the epicenter of a scandal that connected personal privilege, political corruption, and international criminal networks. But the most chilling thing wasn't what was said. It was what wasn't. Melania never denied it. She didn't even speak. And Jasmine, with the composure of someone who knew her timing down to the second, simply folded her notes and said, "I yield my time." That was just the beginning. In the 48 hours that followed, the media split in half. Fox News called it a witch hunt engineered by radical progressives to smear the Trump legacy. MSNBC called it the bravest moment on live TV since Edward R. Murrow took on McCarthy. Meanwhile, legal analysts across networks began sifting through a mountain of data. Newly surfaced SEC filings, leaked bank transfers, and court documents from Slovenian civil cases long buried under political pressure. The name Vistal Ventures trended for 2 straight days. But underneath the headlines, something else was shifting, something deeper. For years, Melania Trump had lived at the intersection of elegance and enigma. Never quite in the political fray, never fully outside it. Her silence had been interpreted as mystery, sometimes grace, sometimes cold calculation. But after Crockett's revelation, that silence took on a new weight, a different meaning. The quiet wasn't poise, it was strategy. And strategy, in politics, is always about protecting something. The timeline that emerged painted a portrait far more complex than a fashion model turned First Lady. It revealed years of quiet collaboration, intentional distancing, and subtle power moves that insulated Melania from the legal firestorms engulfing her husband. But more damning was the pattern of financial activity. The fake loans, the foreign transfers, the boutique real estate deals with zero transparency, and shell buyers linked to firms already under federal investigation. For months, Crockett's team had been assembling a case, piece by piece, in coordination with a task force within the House Oversight Committee. They weren't after Melania for political spectacle. They were after the mechanism of immunity that allowed someone to hide behind the office of First Lady, while benefiting from networks of corruption that harmed ordinary people. And now, the public knew. What began as a televised conversation about empowerment had turned into a forensic examination of the most protected woman in Trump world. But Crockett wasn't done. Not even close. That same night, she went on the Rachel Maddow show and said something that turned every legal analyst's head. "There are names we haven't revealed yet," she said. "There are transactions we've only just begun to verify." This isn't just about Melania Trump. This is about a system of shadow influence, of international players who learned how to exploit American media, American politics, and American silence. The camera cut to Maddow, stunned. "Are you saying there could be indictments?" Jasmine's eyes didn't flinch. "I'm saying the American public should prepare for the truth." And just like that, the game shifted again. From an exposé to an investigation, from public shame to prosecutorial pressure. And it was in that mounting pressure, amid subpoenas, legal threats, PR damage control, and the mobilization of congressional firewalls, that something truly unexpected occurred. A second whistleblower came forward. A name no one expected. Melania's former financial advisor. He wasn't just ready to talk. He had files, thousands of them. And among those files, one name kept appearing again and again, across contracts, emails, and transaction memos. Ivanka Trump. And that's where we turn next. The first file was innocuous. A scanned PDF labeled IT consult _invoice _Mar 2009. Nothing extraordinary. Until investigators cross-referenced the invoice number with a trail of wire transfers from an offshore account routed through Cyprus. What emerged was a spiderweb of financial links, each thread stretching from Eastern European shell companies to a boutique consultancy in New York managed by, ostensibly, Ivanka Trump. When Jasmine Crockett uttered the phrase "system of shadow influence," this is what she meant. The public was still grappling with the idea that Melania Trump may have served as a passive conduit in a laundering operation. But as the new whistleblower, known only by the pseudonym Orion in early court filings, released metadata and internal correspondence from a secure server once housed in the Trump Organization's now-defunct Global Expansion Division, the implication was chilling. Melania may not have been passive at all. And Ivanka? She may have been the architect of the whole operation's public legitimacy. We're no longer in the realm of tabloid intrigue or partisan mudslinging. What Jasmine Crockett and her team unearthed is nothing short of a potential legal powder keg that could ignite criminal cases on 3 continents. But let's rewind for a moment. Orion's statement, submitted under penalty of perjury and verified through digital authentication by House oversight tech experts, included detailed descriptions of meetings involving Melania Trump, Ivanka Trump, and a group of foreign nationals, some of whom are already on U.S. sanctions lists. These meetings, according to Orion, took place between 2008 and 2012 at a property in Greenwich, Connecticut, purchased discreetly under a trust managed by an LLC with ties to Ukrainian oligarchs. These weren't social gatherings. They were business negotiations, agreements drafted in coded language, consulting pipelines, brand asset diversification, and European development liaisons, matched up directly with later banking activity flagged by FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, in its 2020 leaks. One transaction noted in the files read simply, VT1 SL Holdings, MT Charities via BVI. Investigators quickly translated the initials as Vistal Ventures to SL Holdings, an Ivanka-controlled dummy firm, to Melania Trump's now-defunct charitable fund in the British Virgin Islands. Why does this matter? Because those very same shell companies, used for philanthropic routing, were later tied to disbursements of funds that paid for campaign-adjacent events in key swing states in 2016, without ever being disclosed to the FEC. Campaign finance fraud, money laundering, failure to disclose foreign gifts, use of charities to obscure transactional income, and all of it pointing back to names Americans know intimately, not through politics, but through the mythos of luxury, glamour, and influence. Melania, Ivanka. But while the media flooded with analysts trying to separate fact from fiction, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. For nearly 72 hours after her explosive televised statement, she declined interviews. No pressers, no tweets, not even a C-SPAN soundbite. When CNN's Jake Tapper cornered her in a Capitol corridor, she simply said, "I'll speak when the record is complete." And then came the subpoena. The House Oversight Committee, emboldened by Crockett's evidence and backed by new bipartisan murmurs of concern, issued a formal subpoena to Melania Trump, requesting testimony under oath. The subpoena landed like a thunderclap. It wasn't just symbolic. It was a declaration. You are no longer just a former First Lady. You are a potential subject in a federal investigation. Within hours, Melania's legal team issued a statement calling the subpoena a politically motivated assault on a private citizen's dignity and right to due process. But behind the scenes, Sources close to the Department of Justice confirmed that preliminary investigations had already been underway. Jasmine Crockett had simply made them impossible to ignore. More unsettling, though, was the public reaction. Across the country, Americans found themselves re-evaluating the very concept of immunity through association. Could a woman who'd long presented herself as an apolitical figure, graceful, restrained, private, actually be an enabler of dark money flows and transnational corruption? Was Melania a pawn? Or a player? And what about Ivanka, who'd carefully constructed her own image as a business-savvy diplomat, an innovator in women's empowerment, and a softer shadow behind her father's brash persona? Was she the true mastermind? Those questions intensified when Orion released a damning audio clip. In it, a woman whose voice forensic analysts confirmed to be Ivanka Trump can be heard speaking to an unidentified man, presumably a financial strategist or offshore lawyer. The audio is crisp, cool, and unmistakably coordinated. "If we need to cycle through Melania's trust, that's fine," the voice says. "She doesn't ask questions as long as it looks charitable." That sentence alone triggered a legal firestorm. By day's end, the Office of the Inspector General launched a parallel inquiry into all IRS tax-exempt filings associated with the Melania Trump Charitable Fund from 2007 to 2018. The New York Attorney General's office announced a review of Trump family asset transfers involving real estate and offshore trusts. Even Swiss authorities began asking questions. And all of this from one televised exchange. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett returned to the spotlight, but not with a press tour. Instead, she released a 40-page report, public, accessible, and annotated with links to source materials, financial statements, and summaries of the whistleblower documents. Titled simply "Anatomy of a Silent Empire," it read less like a political hit piece and more like a law journal exposé. Every claim traceable, every footnote accounted for. What Crockett made clear in her press statement was this: this isn't about Melania. This is about the culture of impunity that allows proximity to power to become a shield against the law. Whether it's a first lady, a business mogul, or a reality star turned president, Americans deserve to know who is operating above the law and who is helping them stay there. But what Crockett didn't say, what she didn't need to, was that this was about more than exposure. This was about reckoning, because buried deep in the documents was something else, something subtle, a series of internal memos between Trump Organization executives discussing media softening strategies. One name in those memos stood out: Jasmine Crockett. In a 2019 email chain, a top strategist floated a plan to neutralize Crockett's rising influence if she gained congressional power. The memo mentioned using personal scandals, undermining her legal credibility, and even re-examining her defense work in high-profile police abuse cases. The implication was chilling. The same system she was now exposing had once identified her as a threat and prepared to take her down. But they failed. And now she wasn't just exposing crimes. She was exposing the machinery designed to silence those who speak out against them. And just when the public thought it couldn't go any deeper, a leaked deposition landed in the inbox of a Washington Post reporter. In it, Melania Trump, under questioning, was asked directly, "Did you knowingly benefit from funds you understood to be moved through illicit financial structures?" And her answer? "I was told not to ask questions." The quote made headlines within seconds. "I was told not to ask questions." 14 syllables, barely a breath's worth of speech, and yet their implications hit like a legal sledgehammer. For many Americans, it was the first time they heard Melania Trump admit, even obliquely, that she wasn't merely an ornamental figure in the shadow of power, but someone aware, if not complicit, in the flows of money and manipulation that had defined a decade of Trump-era politics. But who told her not to ask questions? And why did she obey? The deposition, conducted behind closed doors in a private federal inquiry room in D.C., was intended to remain sealed. But a leak, suspected to have come from within the office of the Inspector General, sent the transcript to multiple newsrooms before the Justice Department could respond. Within hours, the phrase trended globally. Hashtags like #MelaniaKnew and #ToldNotToAsk surged across platforms. And then, almost as if coordinated, a second leak dropped. This one included internal emails between Ivanka Trump and a mysterious legal entity known as JDS Strategies, operating out of the Cayman Islands. One email, marked priority and dated December 12, 2015, was particularly explosive. It read, "Per MT's direction, we'll cycle the Q4 funds through the foundation. She's not flagged yet, and optics are manageable if it's positioned as disaster relief. The initials MT, the use of foundation, the timing." This was the same quarter when Melania appeared at a high-profile gala in Monaco, speaking vaguely about women's rights and international aid. It was later discovered that the relief fund she referenced, some $2.1 million, never reached their destination NGOs. They were redirected through a string of Cayman-based trusts and eventually ended up funding luxury renovations on a property in Westchester County, New York, owned by a Trump family trust. This wasn't just a campaign finance issue anymore. It wasn't even just laundering. Federal prosecutors now circled around the word racketeering, the kind of charge usually reserved for criminal syndicates. RICO was on the table, and the question dominating headlines now wasn't if charges would come, but when. But while the legal consequences loomed, the cultural backlash exploded even faster. Melania, who had spent years crafting an identity of aloof elegance, now faced a reckoning far more visceral than courtroom consequences. Communities she had once claimed to support, immigrants, mothers, women seeking shelter from abuse, began denouncing her with unified fury. A women's shelter in Queens, which had received a symbolic $10,000 donation from the Melania Trump Charitable Fund in 2014, returned the money in protest, publicly with a press release reading, "We will not be complicit in laundering empathy for personal gain." But amid the outrage, one figure remained eerily silent: Ivanka Trump. In a rare moment of political alignment, both progressives and moderates began questioning why Ivanka had not yet been called to testify. Even some Republican legislators, sensing the direction of the wind, began speaking privately with DOJ liaisons to position themselves on the right side of accountability. It was Jasmine Crockett who changed that silence. In a blistering floor speech broadcast live to millions, Crockett laid out the entire timeline, from the founding of Vistal Ventures to the dispersal of its funds. She paused midway through the speech, raised a printed copy of Ivanka's 2015 email, and said, "This document is proof of a system. Not just a mistake, not just an oversight, but a system. A system where power meant permission, and silence was bought with just enough plausible deniability. If you ever wondered how the American people get robbed while the rich get richer, how justice always seems delayed when it creeps toward the elite, this is how." Crockett concluded her speech with one final demand, now immortalized in social media clips and news footage: "Subpoena Ivanka Trump." The next morning, the House Oversight Committee did exactly that. The subpoena was delivered quietly to Ivanka's Manhattan residence, but its contents were loud. She was to provide all documents, emails, and records related to Vistal Ventures, the Melania Trump Charitable Fund, JDS Strategies, and a previously unknown entity, Claros Group International. That last name sent researchers into a frenzy. Claros, it turned out, was registered as a global arbitration consultancy, but had no identifiable client list, no public website, and no traceable income statements. What it did have, however, was a dizzying pattern of bank activity. Nearly $84 million moved through its accounts in just 5 years, always in quarterly bursts, always just under reporting thresholds. And more curiously, Claros had shared office space, according to building records, with Apollo Heights Holdings, a property investment firm long suspected of housing Russian assets on U.S. soil. Suddenly, the Trump daughters weren't just exposed. They were vulnerable. Legally, financially, personally. And the narrative changed again. Now it wasn't just Melania or Ivanka. Now it was an entire apparatus, a family-adjacent machine that operated in the shadows of government, laundering not just money, but access, the ability to move influence across continents, clean it through charitable fronts, and redistribute it as cultural capital. Speeches, gala appearances, charity partnerships. The machine had names. It had numbers. It had victims. But it also had one more secret, a memo found in the whistleblower's final folder, dated January 2017, days before the inauguration. It read, "In the event of exposure, revert to Plan V." No one knew what Plan V was. Not yet, but it had been mentioned in 3 separate internal communications, and one of them bore a signature, Melania K. Trump. That was enough to prompt the DOJ to move up their timeline. Within 48 hours, Attorney General Lisa Monaco authorized a preliminary inquiry into whether the Melania Trump Charitable Fund was used as a conduit for foreign money laundering with political intent. For the first time in U.S. history, a former First Lady was under criminal investigation for financial crimes tied to an active presidency. And in the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett, unflinching, calm, prepared, sat for an exclusive 60 Minutes interview. When asked whether she had personal animus against the Trump family, she paused. "No, I don't hate them. I just believe in the law. And I believe in the people who've been crushed under the weight of a system that treats the rich like gods and the poor like pawns. My job is to dismantle that, one truth at a time." But her interviewer had one more question. What happens if Melania flips on Ivanka? Jasmine's response? Then it's not just a story about women in politics. It's a story about how silence is broken when the stakes get personal. And just as she said it, news broke. Melania Trump had hired a new attorney. Not a civil litigator. Not a PR fixer. A federal defense attorney who once specialized in plea negotiations. The phone rang in a darkened office on K Street just before dawn. It wasn't a political strategist calling. It wasn't a journalist either. It was a federal prosecutor, quietly alerting Jasmine Crockett's team that something had shifted. Not just procedurally, tactically. Melania Trump had requested a proffer session. In legal terms, a proffer session is the moment when a potential defendant sits down with prosecutors and offers information in exchange for potential leniency. An overture that says, "I'm willing to talk, but I want to know what I get in return." It is not a confession. It is not a deal. But it is always, always, the sound of ice cracking underfoot. By mid-morning, it was official. Melania Trump had retained the services of federal defense attorney Andrea Nischel, a veteran of white-collar crime cases with a reputation for keeping high-profile women out of prison. She didn't smile during her press briefing. She didn't deny the charges. She simply stated, "My client will comply with all lawful requests and intends to clarify the facts surrounding her involvement with the entities under review." Clarify, not deny. Inside Crockett's office, the mood was steely, not celebratory, because they all knew what it meant. Melania was preparing to flip. And when people flip, they do so for one reason, to avoid going down alone. What unfolded over the next 72 hours reshaped the power dynamics in Washington more dramatically than any bill, hearing, or election in recent memory. For years, Democrats had failed to pin legal culpability on any member of the Trump inner circle in a way that would stick. But now, The First Lady, who once stood smiling beside the nuclear football on the South Lawn, was at the mercy of a legal system she had long been insulated from. Her proffer session, sources confirmed, lasted nearly 9 hours. In that time, she reportedly confirmed that she was fully aware of the role her charitable trust played in receiving overseas funds, that she had signed off on at least 2 property transactions, knowing they involved shell companies with no verifiable income, that she had attended a dinner in Geneva with representatives from Claros Group International, where the term political asset laundering was used explicitly and not metaphorically. More critically, she identified key actors, including attorneys, brokers, fundraisers, and yes, family. Though sealed by federal order, fragments of the session began leaking, first to The Atlantic, then to ProPublica, then to independent watchdogs and financial journalists who had spent years chasing threads that finally found their knot. In one confirmed statement, Melania reportedly said, "Ivanka coordinated the flow. I signed when she told me to. I didn't ask questions because I was told not to by Jared." That one sentence changed everything, because now the investigation wasn't just into Melania Trump or even Ivanka. It was poised to crack open the inner sanctum of Trump world finance, where deals were rarely documented, where gift and favor were interchangeable terms, and where plausible deniability was a currency more valuable than gold. The DOJ convened a grand jury. Jared Kushner was named in a sealed filing, and Jasmine Crockett, now the central figure in the country's most explosive political investigation, did what no one expected. She backed off. No press releases, no interviews, no more floor speeches. Why? Because she knew the moment had reached a legal threshold, one where soundbites could jeopardize evidence, where visibility could taint procedure. The work was no longer public. It was prosecutorial, but the silence didn't last long. A third whistleblower emerged. This one didn't come from within the Trump orbit. This one came from the Treasury Department. In a sworn affidavit, the whistleblower detailed how requests to audit the Melania Trump Charitable Fund in 2018 were internally blocked, not by the Trump administration, but by career officials fearing political retaliation. The affidavit included email threads showing bureaucrats actively minimizing red flags in the fund's international activity reports, conversations that included the phrases, "not worth the heat," and "we'll get killed if this leaks." One email, dated July 17, 2018, was forwarded to a private AOL address listed under a pseudonym, Anna S. Claros, the same name as the arbitration firm, the same spelling. Investigators would later trace the AOL account to a burner phone used in a building owned by Kushner Companies, across from 666 Fifth Avenue. And then the hammer dropped. A federal judge unsealed the first round of indictments. There were 9 names, for were unknown to the public. 3 were mid-level associates tied to the shell corporations. 1 was an international broker under Interpol surveillance. And the final name? Ivanka Marie Trump, charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, international money laundering, failure to disclose foreign assets under FARA, obstruction of justice. The announcement exploded across media like a controlled demolition. The country hadn't seen anything like it since Watergate. This wasn't just political fallout. It was a legal supernova. One that would incinerate reputations, distort legacies, and remake the Trump family's public identity forever. As for Melania, she vanished. For 2 weeks, there were no sightings, no press conferences, no social media posts, not even paparazzi reports from Mar-a-Lago. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, she appeared, flanked by U.S. Marshals, walking into the E. Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse in D.C., her face obscured by sunglasses, her expression unreadable. She was there to testify, under oath, not as a defendant, as a cooperating witness. In the courtroom, according to a leak from someone present during the closed session, she was asked, "Why now? Why speak up after all these years?" Melania reportedly stared at the ceiling for a long moment before responding. "Because I saw what it did to my son." The room went silent. It was the first time anyone had invoked Baron Trump's name in connection to the case. And though no further context was given, that single sentence shifted the public discourse once more, from conspiracy and crime to something closer to humanity. Regret, or perhaps damage control. But Jasmine Crockett had one more card to play. The same day Melania testified, Crockett's office submitted a formal request to the Department of Justice that the Trump charitable entities be fully dismantled, and that a new legislative framework be introduced to ensure that no future political spouse could operate an opaque financial entity without full congressional transparency. She called it the Melania Act, a calculated title, symbolic, sharp, unforgiving, but also necessary, because the American people weren't just watching one family unravel. They were witnessing a system crack under the weight of its own corruption. And Jasmine Crockett? She had become more than just a congresswoman. She had become the nation's truth technician. And the final blow was just around the corner. The Capitol dome loomed gray against the morning sky as Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the House floor for what would become one of the most consequential speeches of her career. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. After months of revelations, depositions, indictments, and covert maneuverings laid bare, she had no need to convince the country of what was true. Now she simply had to explain what came next. "Let's stop pretending," Crockett began. "Let's stop pretending that justice only matters when it's convenient, or that power can remain unaccountable if it wears the right dress, speaks with the right accent, or marries into the right family." The chamber was silent. C-SPAN cameras panned to rows of lawmakers who had once rolled their eyes at her fiery committee performances, but now sat stony-faced. Their names possibly buried somewhere in spreadsheets unearthed by whistleblowers, or listed on private flights long presumed forgotten. Melania Trump was not elected, Crockett continued. She was not appointed. She was not confirmed. But for 4 years, she stood at the center of an administration built on deception and financial opportunism. And now we know she benefited from it. She paused, looking down at the folder in her hands. "And now," she added, "we know who else did too." With that, she entered into the congressional record a report co-authored by the House Oversight Committee and the Department of Justice. It was 312 pages long, with over 3,000 exhibits. The title? Operation Glass Orchid, a legal mapping of influence, finance, and complicity in the Trump family network. The report was the final product of months of silent investigations, cryptic filings, sealed testimonies, and hard data. It laid out, in stunning clarity, a blueprint for how the Trump family had constructed a parallel economy of privilege, one that leveraged proximity to political power to shield illicit international income, disguise foreign interference, and subvert oversight laws that had stood since the Nixon era. At the core were 4 names: Melania Trump, cooperating witness, beneficiary of unreported foreign income, foundation co-signer; Ivanka Trump, indicted, pending trial on 4 federal counts; Jared Kushner, under sealed investigation for obstruction and violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA; Donald Trump, listed 57 times in reference memos, though not formally charged yet. And then, in one small subsection on page 287, was something that stunned even the most seasoned analysts. A scanned check, dated March 2017, from a Trump-affiliated PAC, made out to Judge Mathis Consulting LLC. The memo line read, "Arbitration coordination. Why was a former reality TV judge receiving payments from a political action committee controlled by Trump allies during the precise window when whistleblower audits were being suppressed? What coordination was being conducted under the guise of arbitration? Jasmine didn't elaborate in her speech. She didn't need to. The breadcrumbs were there. But while political media scrambled to track down the implications of this bizarre new thread, Crockett moved the conversation back to the public. "This is about all of us," she said. "Every taxpayer who paid their dues. Every voter who believed the rules applied to everyone. Every woman who's ever been told she's too aggressive when she fights for the truth. This is about what happens when we let wealth and beauty and silence become a disguise for criminality." The gallery erupted in applause. And then, as if to underscore the stakes, the Justice Department made its final move. An arrest warrant for Jared Kushner was issued. He was located in Qatar, reportedly attending a conference on Middle Eastern investment opportunities, and refused to return voluntarily. With no extradition treaty in place, he became the newest Trump world fugitive. But for investigators, his absence didn't slow the process. In fact, it opened a path, because as Melania Trump continued to cooperate, she handed over something else. A hard drive, encrypted, forgotten, she said, in a security deposit box from her early days in New York. But its contents were not forgotten. The files detailed a Plan V, a multi-tiered contingency plan to be deployed if any member of the Trump family faced federal indictment. It included offshore identity switches, data wipes, and if necessary, propaganda partnerships with foreign media outlets to reframe any legal action as deep state persecution. The document listed code names. Melania was Orchid, Ivanka, Citron, Jared, Steel. Donald was simply called Crown. But the most disturbing part wasn't the preparedness. It was the assumption of impunity. One file included a memo from 2016 labeled Untouchable Scenarios. In it, an advisor wrote, "They can't prosecute a first lady. It would shatter the pageantry of the office. The optics are nuclear." But they were wrong, because Jasmine Crockett had detonated that illusion with the precision of a bomb technician. Methodical, surgical, and fully aware of what rested beneath the surface. And it wasn't just Melania who panicked now. It was every donor who moved silent money, every public figure who endorsed the Trump orbit to protect their investments, every bureaucrat who looked the other way, every judge, media mogul, and policy advisor who bet on the myth of immunity wrapped in pearls and red lacquer heels. Now, they were all vulnerable. And as Jasmine Crockett exited the chamber, the press swarmed her with a single question. "What's next?" She stopped, turned, and gave a quiet answer. "We rebuild. Not just the law, not just the ethics, but the belief that no one is above accountability. Not even the beautiful, not even the powerful, and not even the ones who've mastered the art of saying nothing at all." And with that, she walked down the marble steps of the Capitol. Not as a media star or political provocateur, but as a public servant who had reminded the nation that the truth doesn't shout. It waits, it watches, and then it dismantles you.